Good morning. This panel is going to be fun, mostly because it's going to be a surprise, even for Linwood and I who organized it. Every conference has that one panel that takes a little while to gel, and this is that one. Yesterday, some of us were at the Inter-American Development Bank, and Nancy Sutley talked about the fact that there were tens of millions of jobs and trillions of dollars contributed to the U.S. economy by our oceans and coasts. I think that it is therefore, not debatable that the ocean and coast has an economic and market value, and that value is higher if it is healthy. As Louis' film this morning indicates, some of that economy, some of that market is false. Some of the value, the jobs created, the funds generated are offset by externalities that far exceed the value of the contribution to the economy as a whole, but we don't measure them that way, and we need to start measuring them that way. Part of what Linwood and I wanted to do, and I want to thank Linwood for doing a lot of the heavy lifting in talking to people about this panel and getting this panel put together and seeking all sorts of folks to join this panel, was to talk about what are the pieces of the coast and ocean that generate jobs that are good for the coasts and oceans. What are those things like diving, surfing, sailing, that are essentially benign but generate tremendous amount of revenue stream for our country? We have 3 speakers, and Linwood's going to set a little bit of context for those 3 speakers, and then he's going to be the moderator for the Q&A session. Linwood is currently the Director of Ocean and Coastal Policy at the Duke's Nicholas Institute, but he's also currently the acting Chief Economist at NOAA. He was with us as our Director of Economic Research at the Ocean Foundation before that. Our 3 speakers are Jeff Nadler, who is the Industry and Government Relations Executive for PADI, Greg MacGillivray, who's the President of MacGillivray Freeman Films, and Lissa Morgenthaler-Jones, who's the founding CEO of LiveFuels Incorporated. Linwood.
Thank you. Can we turn the lights up? I have nothing to hide. We'll all be just speaking. I don't know who controls the lights.
I think there may be a slide.
Yeah, there'll be a couple of slides for Lissa. Well, good morning, everybody. I have at times been accused of being a little too evangelical about what I call the other ocean economy, but I think if anyone who had accused me of that before this morning's panel, they have a new baseline. I think we'll be a much more staid, but I think we're going to bring to you a message of hope. And what I want to talk about is the other ocean economy, and that's what our panelists are going to talk about here too. When we talk about the ocean economy as a nation, we tend to turn to the same 3 big parts of the ocean economy: oil and gas, commercial fishing, and marine transportation. That's where all the money is, so we think, but that's where all the money is concentrated. That doesn't mean that's where all the money is. That doesn't mean that's where all the jobs are. Started hearing a little bit about that in the first panel. So that's the opposite of turning the lights up. Can you turn the lights back up, please? Particularly what we really want to focus in is the huge value that's associated with the ocean economy that's very widely distributed, especially things like tourism, recreation. There's a recreation panel tomorrow. Homes and home values. As an environmental community, the ocean community has often been at odds with the home building businesses, but there's a lot more to homes than building them. There's keeping them going, there's maintaining them. And a lot of people live where they do so they can be near the ocean. There are a lot of first-generation people in the Gulf of Mexico living near the coast. Okay? Those people move there to fish and swim and be near the ocean. A lot of people in eastern North Carolina that want to be near the ocean too. And we've seen in studies that a healthy ocean contributes as much as 20% of the value of a home. That's big. That's a lot of value. And we really don't have a good grasp on how many homes are affected by ocean quality, what the value of these are. We don't keep track of them as a nation. We don't keep track of them in our GDP accounts. And we're trying to move forward with that. NOAA's working with the Bureau of Economic Analysis to think about how we would create ocean satellite accounts that would move us in that direction. We will today talk about energy in a number of panels. Energy is one of these areas where we don't even have a good idea of what we might be getting out of this industry. It's changing so fast, and so when we think about the ocean economy, there's so much that's emerging that isn't even within our realm of understanding in terms of potential value, and we have to keep our eye on that. And then, of course, there's the whole art and aesthetics of the oceans, and Dave Wilmot and I were talking about the fact that for many people, the art and aesthetic of an ocean doesn't have anything to do with the health of the ocean. But more and more people really do see the health of the ocean, and they get it, and they see the animals, and they come not just for the sand and sea that we've always talked about when we've talked about why people care so much about the ocean, but for all the wildlife that's associated with it. I remember taking my professor from the East Coast to Santa Monica Bay. We went down to the water, and we saw all sorts of dolphins, and he said, I didn't know they had dolphins in the Santa Monica Bay. I was like, of course they have dolphins in the Santa Monica Bay. Why do you think we live here? So it really is true that there's a lot to the ocean economy. And, you know, it all matters. It's important to have all of these sectors of the ocean economy vibrant. We talked about resilience this morning, and it isn't that you should be resilient. It is that we should help you be resilient by having an ocean economy that is not all fishing or not all oil and gas. When you talk about where our hands are tied because the whole economy in our town depends on fishing, that is not a very diverse economy. And we've seen this. We've seen when we lose working waterfronts, it is often because working waterfronts are not diverse. We have a limited idea of who should be allowed on the working waterfront. And that idea needs to change. We're going to talk about these parts of the ocean economy because, as Mark mentioned, they can be sustainable. And I'm not going to be naive and say they are sustainable or they are good. As David Guggenheim pointed out about aquaculture, and these aren't his words, these are mine, but we as a species have an amazing ability to take good things and do them badly. So everything we're going to talk about could be done badly and is not necessarily sustainable, and we have to keep our eyes on this. So when we think about marine spatial planning and things like that, we don't want to put anything out of sight and out of mind, because if we do, you can guarantee that people won't account for those externalities we've been talking about, and we'll do it badly. I don't know how many of you were at the IMCC or have heard Astrid Schultz and Tegan Hoffman talk about their layer cake approach. That is, you know, one of the reasons that we can do oil and gas is because we can do just that one thing and extract a lot of value from a small place in the ocean. If we want to do things more sustainably, if we want to harvest all of these other sectors of the economy, we've got to do them in a concerted way. And so Astrid and Tegan talk about the layer cake. You do sound management for something that's perhaps extractive at a sustainable level. You get paid for ecosystem services. You bring in recreation, tourism, filmmaking. It adds up. And very quickly, it's bigger than those single extractive, single-use values. So we need to think about how we pull that together. So it's resilience, it's diversity, and it's value. If we fail to take into account in our decisions these many other smaller, but when summed cumulatively, very important parts of the ocean economy, we do so at our peril. It endangers jobs if we forget about these in our coastal planning. It endangers income. It endangers the tax base upon which many of these coastal communities exist. And it endangers our well-being, because when we talked, there was, I think, I don't know your first name, but your last name's Mittermeier, right? Yeah. When you were talking about, Christine, when you're talking about, you know, do we care about fish that we've extracted or fish in the ocean? We care about it in both ways. Because that fish in the ocean generates value too. It generates value in terms of people's willingness to pay to keep them there, but it generates jobs. It generates recreational scuba diving jobs. It generates catch and release fishing jobs. So we have to be very cognizant of these many different examples. And we tend not to. We tend to focus on the big three. And as an example, I want to talk a little bit about Morro Bay, a place that I've worked quite a bit on the West Coast. Morro Bay is a small community in the Central Coast that's done some really innovative things with regard to commercial fishing. We've done buybacks. They've done buybacks with the Nature Conservancy and Environmental Defense, involving fishermen in all sorts of levels of research. But the town has made some decisions that reflect its perception of its economy that existed 20 or 30 years ago when fishing really was the dominant form of economic activity there. This town had as its official position opposition to the Marine Life Protection Act. And this town has worked very hard to bring in money to support a fish processing plant, which will be a very good thing for the commercial fishing industry. But what this town hasn't done is really consider its whole portfolio of economic activity. So that commercial fishing industry now generates $2 million of gross revenues a year. With a better fish processing plant, we could bump that up to $5 million. In its heyday, in the period where we know we were overfishing, it was generating $10 million a year. Compare that to the $145 million that people who went to the 2 coastal state parks that are contiguous with that town spent in town. They spent it at hotels, they spent it at t-shirt places, saltwater taffy, and they didn't come to Morro Bay to buy saltwater taffy. They came to Morro Bay to go to the coast, to go fishing, to see birds, to see otters, to go surfing. And that economy is what drives Morro Bay. But the decisions that are being made in Morro Bay often don't fully reflect that economy. Part of the reason is we still maintain this cultural bias in our country that certain kinds of ocean jobs are more important than other kinds of ocean jobs. That somehow a fishing job is sacrosanct and is different than a job owning a surf shop. Well, it's not. We have lots of towns where people have been surfing for 60 years. It's the culture. We have a lot of places where the surf shop is owned by someone locally, just like the fishing boat is, and it employs people who work locally. Same for the taffy store, same for the t-shirt shop. Okay? We have to understand that this economy is broad and includes a lot of people, and that all of these jobs have value, and that none stand above the other just for reasons of historical expediency. Okay. So as we talk about this, I want you to remember that one of the reasons we had a hard time putting this panel together is because many of the people in the industries I just described are busy and they're small business owners. This is the high season. They couldn't come. They're unorganized as an economic sector. And it's because of that lack of organization that it's so hard to incorporate them into coastal management, into the way we do marine spatial planning, if that moves along the way we hope it will. We have to understand that their lack of participation doesn't mean that there's a lack of value there. And we need to figure out how to do a better job of including these parts of the sustainable ocean economy in our decisions. Thank you. I never did get the links back.
Hi, I'm Greg MacGillivray. I'm the art part of the economy. I'm a surfer, a diver, a filmmaker. I've been making films since I was 11 years old. I grew up in Laguna Beach, California. That's where our company is today. It's MacGillivray Freeman Films. We've been making IMAX theater films for the past 35 years, beginning with a film that we produced for the Air and Space Museum back in 1974. It premiered in 1976. It's called To Fly. It's still playing at the Air and Space Museum every day. What my point is that we have to get people of the world to fall in love with the ocean as we are. We have to get people to think about the ocean as often as we think about the ocean. We have to have them understand that even if you live in Omaha, Nebraska, the ocean impacts you in very profound ways. So what my wife and I, my wife is here, Barbara and I have done is decided to spend the next 15 years of our lives in developing a campaign that will get as many as 1 billion people worldwide based on our IMAX theater network, which are in 211 wonderful museums throughout 32 countries in the world. Get those people that we can draw there and get people to watch television shows and YouTube videos and open books and really get engaged by entertainment events and all kinds of other projects, but try to get people to pay attention to the ocean. It's a campaign that we feel motivated by. We're passionate about this. Frankly, we're a little bit pissed off as some of the questions seem to be related in that last session, because we feel that people are not paying enough attention to what we care about most, and that is the fish stocks and the way we utilize the ocean. We have to make a difference. The first film that we're putting out is called To the Arctic. It's all about the Arctic environment, polar bears, caribou herds, climate change, and how it is changing. That first film we've been producing for the last 5 years will come out in February this coming year. It's released by Warner Brothers. It'll have a huge marketing campaign, a $25 million marketing campaign, which has never happened in our industry before in IMAX, all developed around the polar bear and Coca-Cola. That campaign will begin November 1st. Everyone will know about polar bears by the time this film comes out and their plight. And I brought a little clip, actually, some entertainment and art for your enjoyment this morning. So let's play that. Well, thank you. Our campaign will begin with To the Arctic and then continue on. It starts this August with our association with the America's Cup, trying to get boaters involved with the ocean in a very conscious way. Every race that you see on the America's Cup television channels will focus on One World, One Ocean, our campaign. We'll be tied at the hip with that whole race series, which begins August and then continues on for the next 2.5 years. We're combining and partnering with many, many big associations like the America's Cup, like Coca-Cola. We have about 4 more commercial sponsors who are already signed up and ready to go. We feel that the real challenge here is to rise above the clutter of everything else that's happening in everyone's lives and get people to care. We think we can drive this attention and passion through film and media and education, and that's what we're hoping to do over the next 15 years. It's a $95 million campaign. 45 million of it goes to productions, the internet, social media campaign. $50 million is spent on marketing so we can rise above the clutter of everyone's lives and get some attention. What we found, and the reason that we're spending so much time and money on marketing, is that even with a brilliant film like Inconvenient Truth by Davis Guggenheim and Al Gore, that before that film, 66% of the United States population believed in global warming. After the film, 89% believed in global warming. So there was a huge spike of attention and belief and communication about global warming right at that one moment. But then 2 years, just 2 years after that film came out, that number dropped back down past where it had been previously. It's now 58% of the US population say they actually believe in global warming. Sure, there's deniers out there naysaying the facts. The thing that we found out from that statistic is that you just can't hit it one time and then go away. You have to have a sustained campaign that is continual. So we're building 13 films over the next 6 years, and then probably another 13 or maybe even more films in the years following through the next 15 years. So we'll have a continual campaign of great entertainment, education that will really impact people severely at the IMAX theater museum sites, 211 museums in 32 countries of the world. Soon to be 100 theaters in China, where we really do have to make a difference. And the reason I think that we can have a success is that museums are the most trusted source of information for the public here in the United States. 87% of our population trusts information that they receive from museums. It's far lower with network news, it's far lower with Congress, it's far lower with teachers. 87% people trust what they see at a museum, and that's the kind of respect that they hold their IMAX films to, and that's what we hope to deliver. So we're dedicated. We hope to join with many, many of you and support what you're doing. It's a two-way street. We should all join together in a fashion to actually try to make a difference, get people to think about the ocean more often. Thank you.
I am Lissa Morgenthaler-Jones of LiveFuels, my co-founder, Dave Jones. Dave, would you just signal you're back there? Certified diver for almost 40 years, sailor and lover of the sea forever. And one of the consulting scientists who has worked with us, Dr. Cliff Gowdy. Would you wave and let everyone know where you are? Cliff is not responsible for what I'm going to say today, but he has consulted for us along with quite literally dozens of other top scientists. And Cliff was the former head of MIT's Offshore Aquaculture Center, so this is a man who knows and deeply cares about the ocean. LiveFuels began as a mini Manhattan project 5 years ago, and $11 million later, that's what we've spent on research. We started by paying the Department of Energy 5 years ago to think about algae to fuel, because DOE was missing in action. And all of you have driven, ridden, and flown all your lives on algal oil, because it wasn't the dinosaurs that got you here, except for those of you who walked today. It was algae, most of it diatoms from the Cretaceous era. So our crack AV staff is way ahead of me. LiveFuels has come to you today to introduce for the first time in public a concept that we have borne out in our research, because you, the ocean community, are the right people to be intellectually honest about this and help us think about, are we on the right path? We have spoken before the algae groups, who are obsessed with making algae into a petroleum replacement and don't care how much money or time or resources they destroy to get there. We have spoken before the fishing communities, who care a lot more about making money from fishing than they really care about restoring the oceans. You are the ocean folk, and the world is coming to you. Your time, I think, is almost here. And the reason begins with phosphorus. We have come to you backwards. We started in Southern California on a fish farm that raised catfish in relatively fresh water. Water that was taken from the Colorado River, but it was fundamentally Las Vegas recycled wastewater. I mean, that's what flows down the Colorado. And what we found was, if you want to grow algae, your number one limitation is going to be phosphorus, not nitrogen, which 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. We can pull it from the atmosphere, that's okay. What we cannot replace or substitute is phosphorus. Your body, except for you big guys, has about 1.5 pounds of phosphorus. 85% of that's in your bones. Your DNA, you know that double helix they talk about? That's a phosphate sugar backbone. We do not live without phosphorus. The US has an estimated 30 years of phosphorus left. You can't grow anything without it, let alone algae. Morocco is the Saudi Arabia of phosphorus. They only have 90 years. Morocco's not that fond of us. Syria has some, China has some. China is so hip to this, they aren't exporting their phosphorus anymore. They can see what's coming. What happens is we put phosphorus when we can find it, and most of our phosphorus mines are in the Bone Valley in Florida. So that big fossil deposit that runs sort of diagonally across Florida. We mine it there, incidentally bringing up a fair amount of uranium. We stack it about 200 feet high, acres in size, into what are known as gyp stacks. Every time a hurricane comes through, it just blasts that stuff, which is highly acidic, into the rivers, etc. So we are mining out the phosphorus that we have that was laid down by marine organisms millennia ago. This is the reason the world is going to come to you, ocean folk, and you need to think about what your answer is going to be, because they're going to want your phosphorus, which washes down the rivers to the ocean, attaches to soil particles, precipitates out, and lands on the ocean floor. There, it sits in a kind of equilibrium, some of it in the ocean sediment, and some of it in the waters just above the ocean sediment. So this is one of the issues that you all are going to have to think about, because the world will come to you and say, we need your phosphorus. It's too expensive to mine from seamounts or from the sea floor. At least it has been historically. We think it will continue to be. But nature, of course, fills every niche. Algae will assimilate automatically 99.9% of the phosphorus in the water around them. They are nature's way of recycling nutrients. So we came at you backwards. We started in freshwater. We realized we were going to need phosphorus. And just anecdotally, in 2008, when there was that mania for food and feed and fuel and biofuel, we called our supplier for this fish farm. It was the largest catfish farm in California. And we said, we need a tank of phosphoric acid because we need to bring the pH down. And the pH in our catfish ponds was 9 and occasionally ranging up to almost 11. I mean, you want to talk about alkaline? So we needed some phosphoric acid. And the supplier said, I'll help you out, but this is my last tank. The price is going up, and I don't know when I will get more. That's how real this phosphorus issue is. The world is going to come to you, ocean folk. You need to think about what your answer is going to be. Next slide, please, sir. Oh, can I do it? I can do it. Okay, that's what it's going to look like. This graph starts in 1996. And if we use phosphate faster, we're going to be the orange line, coming down fast, as opposed to the red line if we're using it more slowly. And the problem is everybody wants to eat. Everyone wants biofuels. China, which used to eat 1/10 of the meat that we did, about 10 pounds a year, now eats per person half the amount of meat we do, which is 120 pounds per person per year. And of that, you guys probably drag up the average because most of you, how many of you are serious seafood eaters? Only less than half. Okay, so you're not dragging up the average very much. But if you are an average American, you consume almost 16 pounds of seafood per year. which is just less than the turkey you consume, which is about 17 pounds a year. So that's what the future is going to look like. Cannot grow food, cannot sustain life without phosphorus. They're going to come to you, ocean folk. Think about what you're going to say. Now, this is the thing that we're going to talk about today for the first time in public. And I'm going to be interested to see what Cliff has to say. This graphic comes to you from the Royal Society. And the message I would bring you is fairly simple, which is most of the CO2 that is the issue is in the surface oceans. It's in the first 300 feet, the mixed layer. It's not getting down to the deeper layers. 91% of the carbon in the ocean is bicarbonate. 8% is carbonate. Only 1% is CO2. Somebody here may know what percentage of that is carbonic acid. I don't know what that number is. I presume it's in that 1% of CO2. The real issue, this report was issued in 2005. It may be one of the best, if not the best, on carbon in the world, on ocean acidification. But the point of this was we're building it up in the surface layer. You can see actually you can't see. In the marine sediments, there are 30 million gigatons, which is the British way of saying billion, that you and I would call that 30 trillion tons of carbon down there. Up in the atmosphere, there are 700 billion tons of CO2. It's a rounding error compared to the marine sediments, which is 100 million years worth of carbon. So long story short, we looked at this and said, okay, if the problem here is we're building up CO2 in the surface layer and it's not diffusing down fast enough because we have put too much CO2 in the atmosphere, what if we did some mixing? This comes to you, the chart on your left comes to you from NOAA, those fine folks, Linwood's confreres. And what we have concluded is, because we came at this from algae and the nutrients we were going to need, it may be that ocean acidification is not only due to fossil fuel use. Because in the last 200 years, the other thing we've gotten really good at is fishing out the oceans. And the thing you may not know, but this was first proposed by Charles Darwin's grandson 50 years ago, is that fish constitute 1/3 of the mixing in the oceans. 1/3. The wind, all that wind that goes by, all those hurricanes, constitute about 1/3. The currents and tides, another 1/3. But the fish are the final 1/3. And you think about something like tuna, which can dive 5,000 feet, they are the vertical mixers. They are the ones who pull the nutrients up from the deep, where they sink, to the area where the CO2 and the sunlight is, which we algae folk care about, mix them together, and then the heavier, denser particles sink, dragging CO2 with them. Is it possible? Is it likely that the reason we're seeing such fast ocean acidification in the surface mixed layer is because we have fished out the vertical mixers, the fish? Subsequent research from Caltech, Walter Monk at Scripps, some of you know him, he's a legend, seems to confirm this. So for today, for the first time, we are talking about this in public. We think the future of the ocean and the future of humanity is going to be inducing upwelling so that we bring the nutrients from the deeps to where the CO2 is in the photic zone, where the sun can hit it, turn it into algae, have that algae harvested by fish, natural eaters of algae, and haul the fish out of the ocean. At this moment, we pull out 75 million tons of fish, maybe 50 million tons from the ocean. That is less than 1% of the CO2 that we emit every year. What would happen if we allowed all of that CO2 to mix with the nutrients as it used to become algae, to become fish, and then we pull that carbon out in the form of fish? And the final note that I will make is, even the vegetarians in this room, you're doing the best work of anyone, but it takes about an acre of ground to feed you per year. Chinese have gotten it down to almost a third of an acre. It's really hard to feed a human on less than an acre per year. If you're a carnivore, it takes 5 to 7 acres to feed you. In this country, we've got 300 million people, and we got 450 million acres of cropland. That's an acre and a half per person. We're headed for 400 million people in the next 40 years, just in this country. That means we're going to have about an acre per person. Where is the food going to come from? And the rest of the world has it a lot worse than we do. We in the US are so much better off than anyone else. Ocean folk, they are coming to you. If we are correct, this is a way to reverse ocean acidification, feed the world, and potentially prevent the future wars. Because if you noticed in 2008, there were 70 countries that had unrest. 2 months ago, 3 months ago in Tunisia, the fight that began was by an orange seller who fundamentally was having problems buying food. That was the flame that lit the match. There will be riots around the world because of a shortage of food. The world is going to come to you, ocean folk. What will you say? Thank you for having us here today.
Good morning. I'm Jeff Nadler from PADI. For those who don't know what PADI is, we're the largest recreational diver training organization in the world. We have 135 professional instructors and dive masters around the world who introduce the general public to diving and train them to scuba dive. Each year, those professional members certify 950,000 scuba divers at all various levels of training. And there are 6,000 professional dive businesses who are members of PADI who provide services to them. About 20 years ago, actually over 20 years ago, PADI introduced we launched a campaign and a concept we called Project Aware. And this Project Aware's mission was to create conscientious divers who had a commitment to environmental protection and also ocean stewardship. It led later on to the formation of the Project Aware Foundation, and today the mission and the goals of Project Aware is to support projects that increase the abundance and diversity of marine life and to achieve cleaner, healthier oceans. So that's what PADI is all about. Now, relative to the dive community overall, how big is this diving community? Globally, it's estimated there are 6 million active scuba divers and 11 million active snorkelers. Each year, about 400,000 people get newly certified to scuba dive. An additional 1 to 2 million take a formalized, what we call a resort course experience. And afterwards, while they're on vacation, they can continue to dive under supervision while they're on that vacation. Then there are unknown millions of people who will do a try-dive experience, supervised to actually get underwater. We don't know how many, but just one example, there's an island in the South China Sea called Hainan Island. 1 million visitors do a try-scuba each year just to that one island. So it's a huge, huge percentage of the world population who gets introduced to the oceans. Now, who are these certified divers? Who are they? 2010, median household income was over $46,000, and 65% of those was actually over $75,000. So it's a very affluent group. 53% are between the ages of 20 and 39. Additional 39% are between the ages of 40 and 59. 67% are male. 58% are married or living with a life partner. 69% are empty nesters. They no longer have children living at home. 40% have college degrees. Additional 18% have graduate degrees. And a further 20% have attended some college. Now, relative to their activity, 96% of them travel to dive. Two of the key, most important areas in the United States when it comes to diving are Florida and Hawaii. In Florida, 36% of the divers plan to travel to Florida. In actuality, 20% of all visitors to the Florida Keys are scuba divers. As to Hawaii, 40% of the divers plan to go there. And besides the divers themselves, according to the Hawaii Department of Tourism visitor surveys, there's a very high participation in scuba and snorkeling by their visitors. What their report shows in 2008, that 53% of all visitors from the western United States participated in snorkeling and scuba, 48% of the visitors from the eastern US, 19% of the visitors from Japan, 55% of those from Canada, and 46% of those from Europe. So diving is a very popular activity, snorkeling is a very popular activity for the public as they travel. Now, while Hawaii and Florida are certainly the most visible and prevalent and popular destinations for diving in the United States, there are certainly others. For example, Southern California, between the Channel Islands and also artificial reefs, it's a very, very popular destination with a phalanx of dive boats that take divers out to those sites. Wreck diving in North Carolina and New Jersey are also very, very popular and draw traveling divers. And then, of course, the Gulf states, besides Florida itself, in terms of getting out to the flower gardens. And, of course, those businesses there were definitely impacted by the oil spill. Now, because we actually, as divers, see the impact, we're the one group that actually is able to visually see it when we do our activity. We see that divers tend to have a very strong appreciation for healthy oceans and a commitment to activism and advocacy to protect the oceans. Just one minor example. This last February, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission was considering ending the moratorium on the harvest of the Goliath grouper, which is still critically endangered across its natural range. What we did is, to all of the PADI instructors, dive masters, and stores throughout the United States, we sent them an email, explained what was being considered, identified, provide the details on the 3 options that the commission was considering, and we asked them to fill out a survey to what was their opinion in terms of what should be done. We also posted that same information on our social website so that the diving public could see it. In less than 48 hours, 1,700 responses were received. 91% of those identified that they preferred that the commission maintain the status quo and that they manage the Goliath grouper for high ecotourism values. Very significant. The commission did decide to maintain the status quo. So clearly, the dive industry and the dive public are strong advocates for the healthy ocean. But what does it mean economically? Well, there are an estimated 1,500 professional dive stores in the United States, and they're typically very small businesses. Surveys show that the average dive store has 4 full-time employees, 4 part-time employees, and then 10 contract instructors who conduct training for them. Their annual gross revenues average between $500,000 and $650,000 per year. Now, as to the economic impact of divers actually going diving, there was a survey done by the University of Plymouth, which indicated that for every 10,000 diver days, 3 full-time equivalent jobs were created. Half of those were direct in diving, and half were indirect, hotels, restaurants, and other services. It also identified that for every 10,000 diver days, it contributed over $1 million to the gross domestic product. So that means in the United States that there are approximately 115 million annual diver days in both scuba and snorkeling. That means $11 billion was delivered to the annual U.S. gross domestic product, and more than 340,000 full-time equivalent jobs were created. In 2003, there was a study done in Hawaii of the tour boat industry, which dive charters were part of. And this indicated that $200 million were reported in gross revenues in 1 year just through the tourism, which included also whale watching and other activities, but diving was part of that. And also there were 2,000 employees involved in those activities. So you can see there's definitely a huge economic value here. 2004, there was a study done of the reefs in Martin County, Florida. And what was seen from that study was that snorkel and scuba related expenditures were just over $1 million that came from the reefs of those areas. Now, for when you took all reef activities, not just diving, it meant there were $6.8 million generated from the natural reefs and an additional $5.2 million from artificial reefs. So lastly, some information on data on outside the US, the value of coral reefs. This was a study done by the World Resources Institute. It's older information now, but it certainly is, if anything, it's higher today. What they identified in their study that the Caribbean, that the reefs of the Caribbean, specific to tourism, generated $2.1 billion from diving. And that they also identified that the worldwide direct economic value of coral reefs for tourism is $9.6 billion. Right? So what we have here, divers are a very affluent group. The dive industry is certainly a group that's very, very progressive in terms of advocacy for protecting the oceans and creating and helping restore healthy oceans. And we certainly, as an industry and as a public, provide significant economic contributions and employment. So, thank you.